chill though.
We literally had
Wow.
oh no, it was it was making me so much crazy. Like that was the final person who was your thoughts and mine for future documents. And judge. These are not country. You're not opening that file here.
Wow.
She's like, oh, you just put this further. She's like, oh, you just put it further. There's nobody else getting it.
No. But I need to be bored like you.
He's like, I'm gonna talk to him. I'm like, go talk to him right now.
I need to. Also, did you ever watch Doug as a kid?
I watched it.
That sweater reminds me of like the sweater that
Does skater wear sweater like this?
I thought it was
Patty mayonnaise?
Patty Cake.
I'll go stand near them. Do you have anything to Thank you.
couldn't tell if you wanted me to or not. Oh, no, I'm just
my god, a nice place.
It was a nice place. Oh, I thought you were talking about my personal life.
Oh,
That's
no,
a
no,
whole
no.
other subject.
Which one? I was about to ask how this about dude who went to the BSU retreat, Blue Blake, and I was like, oh wait, the what? And then he goes, which one? And I was like, oh, I meant the BSU retreat. And he was like, oh, I thought you were talking about your personal life. But wait, what does that mean? Which one? Juicy, there's it.
No, Chaz is cool. He's mad cool. Yeah, it was all good. We were honestly,
No, we wouldn't have survived.
we actually would not have survived. He's like an Eagle Scout.
Like, this top tier Boy Scout.
Let me see.
We started our fire for our bonfire.
Yeah. If it was us, we would not have done that fire.
Okay, a couple more.
Yeah.
Thanks.
He was out there chopping it. Stan was like,
Chopped it?
yeah. When we found out that he was an Eagle Scout, Stan was like, oh, you gonna earn your badges tonight. I was like, you gonna earn your badges tonight. Who's your black folks? You can't do anything. Put it near the fire. That was real. It was great. He also killed us all in Cards Against Humanity. I was dead. He played the sassy black woman card. Oh, how are you doing?
I was actually about to say that. But Addison had to fire what ended my So sassy black. He won. It was like
He won. It was like unanimous among all of us.
one.
I put down the card white, maple white. And his was put down my black ass. I saw. I was like, I don't know if he put it down, but it was like, this is great. We all just died. And then I was like, who put it down? And he raised his hand. Everybody's like, ah! He had the bitches cards. He got with the question.
I remember when the Tom literally killed
He
us.
killed.
At Cards Against
He
Humanity
killed.
and all the right. It was kind of like using the SNL skit with the Trump supporters.
Yes.
All the
I knew all the
I
answers.
was watching that immediately when I got home. That was gonna run it about it to you guys. I was like, yeah, well. But it was like, yes!
Have you seen the SNL skit? It's so good.
Skinny girls vibe?
We were just like, wait a minute.
No, seriously.
No, we actually looked at him sideways like, that's funny, but it still makes him down that card. It's like, yeah. So y'all don't know.
You invited white to the retreat, and I appreciated your invite.
And a white person came.
So white person came. Oh.
Okay.
What white person? Oh, okay. Can we talk about how Mike's pastry is not that good?
For a second?
It's okay. Everyone raves about it.
That's my point. It's like
You think it is? Hey, but you're from here.
This semester, something's happened where I've read more about like the mayor and stuff, and I'm like, oh, Boston is dope. So,
Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Charlie Krumholtz and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, note the exit doors which are located on both the Park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please gather your belongings, walk to the exit closest to you, and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag #VargasForum, which is also listed in your program. Tonight's event will begin shortly. Please take your seats now and enjoy the program. Thank you.
Jose was 12 years old. He'd spent his whole life in the Philippines, and one day his mother handed him a plane ticket and said, "You're going to go to Disneyland in the United States and visit your grandparents." It was the last time he saw his mother. He still hasn't been to Disneyland. He ended up living with his grandparents in California. And like many American teenagers, when he was 16, he eagerly lined up at the DMV to get his driver's license. The woman behind the counter said, "Well, these documents aren't real." And that was how he learned that he was undocumented. He went on to a successful career as a journalist in the United States. He was part of a Pulitzer Prize-winning team at the Washington Post. He, in 2010, wrote the first major profile of Mark Zuckerberg for the New Yorker magazine. But all along, he was living something of a lie, not telling people he was undocumented. In 2011, he wrote a cover story for the New York Times Sunday magazine revealing his status, which really kind of exploded in the world of journalism. Some people felt Jose had been lying to them for much of their professional careers together. In 2014, he was finally, for the first time, arrested for his status in McAllen, Texas, while coming to the aid of children who were being detained there at the border. Jose's been an incredible storyteller as a journalist, but also as a filmmaker, making a documentary called Documented, and most recently made an incredible piece you can watch online for MTV called White People, about what it means to be a racial minority in the United States and be white. He's had an incredible career, and he now is the CEO and founder of a nonprofit called Define America, and has started a new journalism venture called Emerging Us. I love Jose. I love the way he challenges me to think about what it means to be an American. And so, without further ado, I give you Jose Antonio Vargas.
Hi, good evening. It's really a privilege to be here with you this evening. It's a privilege on many counts. It's a privilege because we are living through a defining time in the history of this country. Whoever wins on election day, there's a new poll out today if you haven't seen it, 15 days from today, we are faced with a demographic reality that has impacted and will continue to impact all facets of American life. Immigrants and their descendants, mostly Latinos and Asians, will constitute 88% of the overall population growth in this country in the next 50 years. 88%. And this is happening at a time when white Americans are an emerging racial minority, which is the first time they've ever been, and happening at the same time when the movement for Black Lives, the Black Lives Matter movement, has started an essential conversation. So basically, a conversation that's been stuck in a black and white narrative is getting a lot more complicated. And immigration is at the heart of that conversation, whether it's welcomed or unwelcomed, legal or illegal. It is a privilege to be here because you are looking at the most privileged undocumented immigrant in America. People like me are usually detained and deported every day, not invited to speak at the John F. Kennedy Forum at Harvard University. Now, I may not have a green card or a passport to show you that I'm an American, but almost everywhere I go, I carry a pocketbook constitution and a copy of John F. Kennedy's A Nation of Immigrants, which to me should be required reading in this country. I actually quoted this book when I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 years ago. It is a privilege because in the past 5.5 years of living as the most visible undocumented immigrant in America, I've been running so fast, growing Define American, the nonprofit that we launch, traveling nonstop. I've visited maybe about 48 states and done more than 800 events and spoken to everybody, Tea Party leaders, progressive activists. I've produced 2 documentaries, including white people, and most recently created this startup. You know that saying, immigrants, we get the job done? That it's been really a privilege to think through this moment in history and prepare for tonight. And the preparation has forced me in the past few days to really reflect and synthesize about what I've learned in the past 5.5 years. You know, since arriving in this country 20 years ago, the most dangerous question anybody ever asked me was, where are you from? Like, where are you from, right? More than 6 years ago, actually, after I went to Harvard, I was on a reporting trip on the Mark Zuckerberg profile, you know, because the Winklevi thing, did he steal the idea? How was he a student at Harvard? So I was here, and then I ended up going to Palo Alto to interview Mark. Now, Mark isn't kind of what the media portrays him to be. I had about 2 weeks with him. And I'm asking him all these uncomfortable questions. And finally, during one of our interviews, he started asking me questions. And one of the questions he asked me was, hey, Jose, where are you from? Now, the easy answer should have been, I'm from Mountain View, which is like the town next to Palo Alto, right? But since I was interviewing Zuckerberg, writing for The New Yorker, been here illegally at that point for more than 18 years, all I could think of is where I'm from is I lie about who I am and where I'm from. The moment that I found out that I was illegal in people's minds, I knew that I had to do everything and anything to succeed. And that meant lying in government forms when applying for jobs, first at Subway, making sandwiches, then at the Washington Post as a political reporter. That meant being fiercely competitive and myopic about my career. My career always came first. Health, friends, family, that was always secondary. Where I'm from is a big part of myself is that I hide a big part of myself from my own friends and people who wanted to get close to me so that they could never ask me questions like, where are you from? Where I'm from is deliberately discounting and neglecting my Filipino identity. I figured that I had to get rid of my really, really thick Filipino accent, which kind of goes like this. So I had to talk white and black at the same time so that no one would ever ask me, hey, where are you from, right? Where I'm from is I am a son of a mother who haven't seen her for 23 years, that I'm a brother and I'm a brother to a younger sister and a younger brother who only know me through tweets and Facebook messages and whatever cool gadget I send them to the Philippines. Where I'm from is a place of really depression and isolation, right? So a few months after Zuckerberg asked me this question of, hey, Jose, where are you from? I answered it in a very, very public way, right? Isn't that the most horrible photo you've ever seen? It's a 4,000-word essay in the New York Times headlined, My Life as an Undocumented Immigrant, headlined Outlaw. Really, it should have said, My Life as a Gay Filipino, Asian-looking with a Latino name who majored in African American Studies, undocumented immigrant. I learned in this process that sometimes you have to risk your life, your career, your sense of security, your safety, real and imagined, to free yourself from it. Against the advice of about 27 lawyers, I wrote this essay and admitted to everything I had to do as both an act of civil disobedience and an act of journalism, which in the history of journalism in this country, sometimes has always been one and the same. I admitted to everything I did against the advice of lawyers so I could tell everybody what it's like to be here. That's why I did that. And then I waited, because I figured I should hear from somebody, right? At that point, President Obama was deporting about 400,000 immigrants a year. President Obama, in the past 7.5 years, have deported more than 2.3 million immigrants, more than any other in the history of this country. I used to cover Obama when I was at the Washington Post. I know people at the White House. I thought someone was going to call. I thought ICE, Department of Homeland Security, would certainly call, but nobody called. And as a journalist, I'm getting a little antsy. I'm like, hey, what's going to happen? So I called the editor of Time Magazine, and I said, I want to write a follow-up story about why they haven't deported me. Hey, if you're going to do this, you should, like, go all the way, right? So the editor of Time Magazine, Rick Stengel, was like, okay, go ahead, Jose. So I actually called the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, myself, introduced myself. Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I haven't heard from you. Are you going to deport me? Why not? The woman on the phone was like, oh, I know who you are. Then she put me on hold, and then she got back on the line, and she said, what are you doing? And I said, well, what are you doing? And then she put me on hold again. And then she got back on the phone and she said, we have no comment, Mr. Vargas. And I said, yo, this is a cover story for Time Magazine. I need a comment from the government. Are you going to deport me? Why not? No comment, she said. We do not comment on individual cases. And you know, when she said that, I thought to myself, this is actually, I think, a metaphor for how most Americans think of us, right? So long as someone is babysitting your kids and mowing your lawns and serving you drinks, so long as people are providing the cheap labor that you cannot live without, whether or not you want to admit it, you're fine, right? It's not your problem, it's Mexico, it's the wall, it's the border, right? No comment. So I wrote the story, and then the editor of Time Magazine, hey, we'll put you on the cover. I'm like, no, that was horrible. Let's do this. Let's do a different thing. So we did this. So that's 32 undocumented young people on the cover of a major magazine. There's a woman from Nigeria. Why don't we ever talk about undocumented black people? About 600,000 undocumented black people in this country. There's a Korean man, Tony Choi. The fastest growing undocumented population in America are actually Asians, not Latinos. Can somebody please tell Donald Trump and his campaign that this is happening? Actually, in this country, 1 out of 7 Koreans in America is undocumented. 1 out of 7. So this is what immigration really looks like. Now, you see Ellen? When we got on that cover, all I could think of was Ellen DeGeneres. I remember being in high school. That was the first ever magazine I ever bought, because at that time, I knew that I was gay, and I knew that I was here illegally, and it was really hard being in 2 closets at once. So I figured I should get out of at least one of them. And when I bought this magazine, I remember putting it in the closet, ironing, because I didn't want my grandparents to see it. And finally, I told my class I had to come out of one of the closets, so I did it during second period US history class, and told the whole class that I'm here as a gay person. But then it took me, 18 years to coming out of the second one. And for me, Ellen was really a critical moment in the way we think about LGBTQ people in this country. That was a cultural shift that preceded a much needed political shift, right? And we decided at Define American that you cannot change the politics of an issue unless you change the culture in which people talk about the issue. So long as all we do is obsess over borders and talk about illegals, we will never see any kind of reform that speak to the humanity of the issue that we're discussing in this country, right? So for us, changing culture, right? Changing culture and changing an issue that is viewed as a political partisan issue by both the media and the very public that consumes all kinds of media. To me, storytelling is more than telling stories. Storytelling is a correction, it's an intervention, it's a liberation. And the birth of Define American actually coincided with a coming out campaign, in which if you're an undocumented person and you're ready to come out about being undocumented, talk to us. We'll connect you with a lawyer. We'll help you get into a news story, a radio story, a print story, whatever. We'll help you do just that. I would argue that the coming out of gay people in this country has fundamentally shifted how we look at gay rights in this country, and I would argue that the same thing needs to happen with immigrant rights in this country. At Define American, we've also been at the forefront of a campaign called Words Matter. Now, let's not play politically correct here. I am here illegally without authorization. So if Donald Trump becomes president and he chooses to want to deport me, he actually can. Right now, the Border Patrol people can come here and get me right away. That is their prerogative. but I, as a person, am not illegal because people can't be illegal. And as a journalist, describing an immigrant as illegal is actually legally inaccurate. Being in the US without documents is a civil offense and not a criminal one. Actually, Justice Anthony Kennedy said, as a general rule, it is not a crime for a movable alien to remain in the United States. The term illegal is actually imprecise. For many undocumented people, immigration status is fluid, and depending on individual circumstances, can be adjusted. So when journalists from the Washington Post or the New York Times or CNN or Fox News, when journalists who are supposed to seek accuracy and fairness use the term illegal, they are actually politicizing an already political issue. And the term dehumanizes and marginalizes the people it seeks to describe. Think of it this way. Can you think of any other circumstance in the American vernacular in which we refer to a group of people as illegal? If someone is driving a car at 14, we say underage driver. We don't say illegal driver. If someone is driving under the influence, we call them a drunk driver, not an illegal driver. Put it in another way. How would you feel if you, or your family members or your friends were referred to as somebody who's quote unquote illegal? And I'm speaking from someone who used to sit in classrooms in this country thinking that I'm some sort of insect in people's backs, right? Do you remember what happened 2 summers ago during the Central American crisis? By the way, we couldn't even call these kids from Central America refugees. We called them what, according to CBS News? Illegal child immigrants. Can somebody define to me what an illegal child immigrant is? And as someone who actually was in a jail cell with these kids, it was only 8 hours. I remember sitting there surrounded by mostly boys because they separated the boys and the girls, and looking at these boys, maybe ages 4 to 13, looking around them and thinking to myself, man, if these young boys had walked from Canada, would we put them in jail? Oprah might have showed up. She might have given a trip to Disneyland. It would have been a human crisis, right? Humanitarian crisis. But no, since they were a bunch of brown kids from Central America, we called them illegal and we blamed the border and tie it to ISIS, right? Isn't that what we do? To me, words matter because facts matter. Isn't it incredible that in this election year, in which immigration has been a central issue, there are defining facts that we just really kind of don't hear about? Did you know that undocumented workers like me have actually paid about $100 billion into the Social Security Fund in the past decade? You know who the source of the information here is? The Social Security Administration itself. It's a primary source. According to the chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, an estimated 7 million people who are here illegally using fake Social Security numbers have paid about $12 million to the Social Security Fund every year. $12 billion. I personally have paid about $130,000 according to the Social Security Administration, and guess what? We don't get it back. But I'm happy to pay for it. I'm glad for the public schools. I'm glad for the roads. I'm glad for the public system and infrastructure. I don't know where I would be without public libraries. I'm happy for all of that. But while we pay these taxes and Social Security, can you at least not talk about us like we're some sort of criminals and illegals? As if your livelihood actually is not connected to ours? Now, I don't know if you know this, since 9/11, we in this country, we have invested $100 billion in border and immigration control. The budget for border security in this country since 9/11 is bigger than the combined budgets of the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the Secret Service, the U.S. Marshals, and the entire budget of the New York Police Department. $100 billion protecting you from the border. Protecting you from Mexico, protecting you from what? Chipotle? What are we protecting you from? And what if I told you that there are actually more Americans going to Mexico than Mexicans going to the United States? What if I told you that illegal border crossings from Mexico are at the lowest level since the 1970s? And what if we ask harder questions like, I'm sorry, what did NAFTA do? Not only to America, but to Mexico, right? And for me, this is a really stunning fact that most of the media doesn't really report. In this country, an estimated 17 million people live in what's called a mixed status household. A mixed status household. So I'm Filipino. Any Filipinos in the room? Hey, Filipino. So we're like the Italians of Asia. We have huge ass families. You know what I'm talking about, right? So in my family, if you look at this picture, so that's my grandparents, my aunts, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, and the white people who raised me. My school principal, my superintendent, my speech and debate coach, all of them in that Thanksgiving photo. So this is what my family looks like. I'm the only person out of all those people who's undocumented. That's called a mixed status family. In this country right now, there are 4.5 million US citizen kids who have at least one undocumented parent. In this country right now, there's about 5,000 US citizen children in foster care because both parents have gotten deported. This is what immigration looks like in this country, right? And for me, words matter because facts matter, because context matters. In the age of globalization, in the digital and social media era, migration is one of the defining human rights of the 21st century. Around the world, there are an estimated 244 million people, it's about 4% of the world's population, who are migrants. That's a record. 4% of the world, 244 million people, are migrants. We are so busy politicizing this issue, obsessing over the Mexico border and calling people names, that we have not yet fully asked fundamental questions, such as, why do people move? It's certainly not to be called criminals, right? What does US foreign policy and trade agreements have to do with migration patterns? In other words, what role does the United States play economically, politically, in this chain of migration? Now, there are about 4 million Filipinos in America. We're the third largest immigrant group. It's Mexicans, Chinese, and then us. 4 million. Manny Pacquiao, Bruno Mars. We count Bruno Mars. He's half, right? A few months ago, I was in North Carolina doing a Tea Party event. It's really important for me to engage with as many different people as possible. And I said it to the whole group. And this man raised his hand very belligerently and said, why are there so many of you here? And all I could say to him was, sir, we are here because you were there. Remember the Spanish-American War? Remember when the Philippines and Puerto Rico became a protectorate of the United States? In other words, here's the big question. If the Western world, if the United States and Europe can grow their economies and develop their industries through colonization and imperialism, why can't people move? And why is it that when white people move, it's courageous, it's necessary, it's manifest destiny, it's white man's burden? And why is it that when people of color move, it's a question of legality and criminality? Are they supposed to do that? Right? What is the fundamental difference there? And while I do believe that countries have a right to define and defend its borders, I think we ought to examine why goods and commodities travel more easily than people. I find it interesting that this iPhone can be manufactured in China, delivered to Cupertino, the headquarters of Apple, and end up in New York where I bought it. So how can this iPhone have more migrant rights than I do? Now, my travels around the country and conversations with all types of Americans have led me to believe that we, and by we, I mean we in the news media and we as Americans, can no longer settle for easy questions and comfortable conversations. Whatever happens on Election Day, we are where we are because our conversations are too comfortable. We are where we are because the stories we tell ourselves are overly simplistic, the narratives are too narrow, our silos are ever so limiting. As an American, because I am in my heart an American, as a journalist and as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, I cannot talk about immigration in a vacuum. Immigrant rights is connected to women's rights, to LGBTQ rights, for the movement for Black lives, for income inequality among all working class Americans, especially working class white Americans, and the issue of white privilege. This is why, since they're not deporting me, I'm keeping busy. Immigrants, we get everything done. And I started a media company. It's actually called Emerging Us. It's all about the emerging American identity, and it's the intersection of race, immigration, and the emerging American identity. In many ways, Emerging Us is everything I've learned about journalism and documentary filmmaking in the age of social media. In an election year in which American identity itself is at stake, the core of the journalistic mission of Emerging Us is exploring this question: who are we and who are we becoming? Who's really the minority and who's really the majority? What happens when the people who we consider other don't want to be othered anymore? What happens when all of us are othered? How do we talk to white people about the fact that the country is getting less and less white? How do we not just fall into the usual liberal, conservative, progressive thing that we do? How do we make sure that when we watch MSNBC and Fox, we're actually questioning the prism in which people are coming from? So these stories that you're about to see in this very short video is the stories that I've been learning about in the Emerging Us in the past year and a half. And I guarantee you that, oh, thank you. Now, I love Vice, I love BuzzFeed, I love Vox, but I guarantee you the videos that you'll see on emergingus.com are not the kind of videos you'll see everywhere else, right? My life, my work, is centered on asking these two core questions. How do you define American? Is it papers? Is it laws? In a country in which laws don't actually mean justice for many people, right? And who is the emerging us? And since I started this whole conversation with the question about privilege, to me the question about privilege is really a question of what are you doing and what will you do to risk yours? We all have some kind of privilege. So what are you doing to risk it? I would argue that my mom, that's my mom, she took this ultimate risk 23 years ago. So she's in about, it's 5 years left on the waiting list for her to come here, 5 more years. I just realized, by the way, that I am now at the same age that she was when she put me on that plane. She was 35 when she put me on that plane. She can't come here on a tourist visa because she's not a college graduate and she doesn't own property. So let me repeat that. She's not a college graduate, she doesn't own property. Now, what does that tell you about race and class? Now, if she were a French woman and she wanted to go see Hamilton over the weekend, all she would need to do is buy a plane ticket and be in New York. And if she wanted to, overstay her visa and become undocumented. But we don't really talk about that in this country, right? So that tells you a lot about how immigration works and how race and class is intersected. I do everything that I can to kind of honor her sacrifice and the ultimate sacrifice that she did. I would argue that that's what immigrants in this country have always done. That's what Ted Kennedy talked about in the foreword in this book. A few months ago, actually, I had the pleasure of being on the O'Reilly Factor. I think Bill O'Reilly went to the Kennedy School. And Bill, interesting guy, says to me on air, "Hey, Jose, just so you know, I'm happy that they haven't deported you, but just so you know, Jose, you don't deserve to be here." And I'm sure my eyebrows did whatever they did. And thankfully, I didn't do it on air. When I got off there, I started thinking, wait a second, like, what did Bill O'Reilly ever do to deserve to be here? With all due respect, right? I find it really, really interesting that people think that undocumented people like me should earn our citizenship. It's earned citizenship, they say, right? Now, I've been trying to earn this. I've been trying to run as fast as I can since I was 16 years old. All I can tell you is no piece of paper and no law is going to make me American. because I already am. That I know. What I also do know is that if you're going to ask me to earn my citizenship, I very, very politely would like to ask all of you, what are you doing to earn yours? If you're an American citizen, can you raise your hand? I sincerely hope you don't take that for granted. And I sincerely hope you know the price that was paid for it. I certainly know what the price was for mine, and I'm not even a citizen. Thank you for having me here. So we're going to take questions.
Our conversations are too comfortable, and so part of the tradition of the forum is the uncomfortable conversation. If you have questions for Jose, please come to the microphone. I will remind you that we'd like you to do your best to keep the questions brief, to end it actually with a question, it's not a statement, and to introduce yourself at the microphone. Up here.
And if you want to deport me, you can go ask me about that too. Hi.
Hi, that's not my question. My name is Liz Coffin-Carlin. I'm an MPP1 student here at the Kennedy School, and I'm formerly a teacher and educator of 5 years in urban areas, working with a lot of undocumented students. And one thing I've really seen is that often undocumented students and families, maybe their families don't come from an education level or a language place where they can read many of the resources available to them, or they're not necessarily connected with organizations that might do this, right? There's a real lack of understanding of what it means to be undocumented and what your actual rights are, and what actually are the things that put you in danger and what's rumor. And I'm wondering if you think that there's work that schools and educators can do from their position of access and power that maybe families that are just working to put food on the table don't have the time or the resources to do, and what, in your view, that might look like.
The first thing I should say is I should plug a panel we're having tomorrow at the Harvard Education, the Graduate School of Education, precisely on this issue. Okay. This is the 15th year of the DREAM Act. The 15th year. Do you guys know what the DREAM Act is? It would have given status, permanent legal status, to undocumented people who were brought here as children, right? It was introduced in the Senate on August 2001, a month before 9/11. So we've never passed it. There are actually states in this country, like Alabama or Georgia, that if you're undocumented, you can't go to any of the colleges, public or private, right? I just think the role of educators here is absolutely key. I think if we're gonna really grow this movement, we really need the voices of more teachers and educators who can speak to how the system has failed, not just the students, but the teachers, because teachers are there to teach. And now they have to deal with this, the legality of these issues. I have to say, for me, this is a really personal thing, because I don't know where I would be if the teachers at Mountain View High School hadn't protected me. My choir teacher, my speech and debate teacher, the principal, all of them took care of me. There's an organization that I'm really familiar with called E4FC. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I worked with them in
California
as well. Yeah,
E4FC.org. It's the Educators for Fair Consideration. It's the largest network of teachers who work with undocumented students. But I would love it if the Graduate School of Education here at Harvard can figure out what else we can do together to provide more information in that way.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ryan Davis. I'm a sophomore at the college. And so as a prominent member of the journalism and media industry, what problems have you found and struggles have you found present along the way with getting other members of the media to help you perpetuate this dialogue and culture of, undocumented Americans?
Oh man, I only have like a few minutes to answer you. That's like a whole book. I would actually be on the record to say that we're gonna look back years from now, and journalism schools are gonna study the utter failure, the large and utter failure of the mainstream media in humanizing and contextualizing this issue. I find it to be really repugnant and irresponsible how, for the most part, we in the news media have just bought into the narrative that Donald Trump has sold us on immigration, right? The fact that you don't even hear about the facts that undocumented workers in this country contribute when was the last time you heard that statistic, right? You don't. The New York Times doesn't talk about that even, and that's the New York Times, right? The framing of this issue has just been wrong, right? Factually wrong. And because I think we've locked the issue to the Mexico border wall issue, I think we've missed the really bigger issue of why people are even coming here. I actually think we in the news media owe Mexicans in particular and Latinos in general an apology for racializing this issue, right? If you're Irish, if you're German, if you're Italian, I actually find it really interesting that people of color always get asked where we're from. So I've gotten into this habit of asking white people where they're from, right? Like, white is not a country. I feel that every American must be able to answer 3 fundamental questions. Where did you come from? How did you get here? Who paid? Right? And that right there tells you a lot about the history of how we treated Italians and Irish when they first got to this country. But here's the main difference. Italians and Irish and German, they can be white. Latinos and Asians, we're never gonna be white. Well, some of us try. But it's just not gonna work. By the way, to that point, I wanna introduce a guy named Jin Park. Jin, can you stand up? I'm sorry, I'm totally embarrassing him. He's a student here at the college. I'm totally outing him, but he's already out as an undocumented immigrant, and he's actually the head of the Define American College chapter here at Harvard. We met at the Harvard Republican meeting, way before that. But I remember you went to the meeting where I specifically went here to talk to college Republicans about how we can get them on board to talking about this issue. And so if you wanna do any events about immigration, any events that don't only include Latinos, please talk to Jin, and let's get this immigration issue out of this box that we've locked it in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jin.
That's it.
What's
Howdy.
up?
My name is Alfredo. I'm also undocumented. I'm in the Harvard Divinity School pursuing a Master of Theological Studies. And I came to the US when I was 15. So it seems to me that the mainstream dreamers narrative has to give up the cultural heritage, communal bonds, to have a claim to American citizenship. So the majority of dreamers define American as growing up in the US and giving up that cultural heritage. So are you addressing this tension in your project, and how are you doing this in such a way that we don't have to lose our identity rooted in our culture, coming from Mexico in my case, and at the same time claim to be an American, to have a claim to American citizenship?
I actually think the beauty of America is you carry all of that with you here, and that makes you more American, right? But there's 2 things, by the way, I should say. Thank you for asking a question. I don't precisely know how many undocumented students there are at Harvard, but just in case we are looking at a Donald Trump presidency, I sincerely hope that all of the teachers and the faculty and administrators at this campus will do everything they can to help undocumented students who go to this university. That's the first thing. The second thing, absolutely, I think expanding this narrative, right? That's precisely why the organization is called Define American. We didn't call it Define Immigrant. The other reason for that is America is not just North America. Right? It's also South America. I mean, there's a whole hemisphere that we're not even talking about. And for me, you know, most people, you heard it here, not everybody even knows what the DREAM Act is, what a dreamer is. I just think this narrative of why people come, right? You know, and I think about, I've been haunted, and I really encourage all of you to get a copy of this book.
Repeat what book it is.
It's called A Nation of Immigrants, A Nation of Immigrants, written by John F. Kennedy. Because in terms of studying the history of migration to this country and the courage that it took for people to come, is something we should celebrate, not shame people about, right? And you know, when people like Ann Coulter, who's an amazing actress, she's been playing that role since the 90s, it's been really effective for her. When she makes the arguments that she makes to sell books, because you know they do sell books, I think she's missing a fundamental quality that even Ronald Reagan, one of our heroes, have said, which is the beauty of America is when you come to America, you become American. Germany doesn't work like that. France doesn't work like that. And that's something that we should protect. I'm proud to be Filipino, and I'm proud to be American. I'm proud to eat lumpia and cook adobo. I'm proud to speak Tagalog. I'm proud of my history, and you should be too.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Hi, I'm Naima Green. I'm a PhD student here at Harvard. Thanks for coming.
Scared of you.
What'd you say?
PhD students scared of you.
Don't be. question for you is, you've talked a lot about the role of the media in this issue, and I'm wondering if you have specific policy recommendations for immigration reform, and also sort of like two-pronged. So first of all, how policy should be reformed in terms of dealing with undocumented immigrants who are already here.
Yeah.
And then also policy reform when it comes to the actual process of immigration to the United States.
So for me, it's been very deliberate why we haven't talked about policy, because out of all of my travels, right, again, 870 events in 48 states in 5.5 years, what I've realized is I can't really talk to you about policy unless we're on the same page about what the issue even is. You're already hearing noise that if Hillary Clinton gets elected president, they want to introduce a comprehensive immigration reform bill, and they want to spend billions of more dollars trying to protect you from this border. I would argue, given the rising cost of college education in this country, I would rather spend that billions of dollars making college affordable than spending it on a border that's never going to be fully secure. 20% of the border, the Mexico border, is already walled off. Here's the big question. Has humanity ever built a border that could withstand human will? So long as parents are hungry, they're going to cross whatever border you put in front of them. Isn't that what the Irish did after the potato famine? When they got on those things called coffin ships, right, just to get here? So I don't want to talk about that. Now, policy-wise, I do think that the whole deportation force, we know, is a farce. That's not going to work, right? 1.8 million undocumented people in the state of Texas alone. In the state of Texas, you can't drive as an undocumented immigrant. I'm sorry, is there a subway system in Texas that I don't? So how are people in Texas getting around? You know we drive, right? That's how we get to work. So for me, I would rather focus on kind of what these issues are state by state, rather than push for a national immigration reform that's over-criminalizes a border that's already criminally, inclined in that way, and spending any more dollars on something that's never going to be secure. Now, we as a country need to decide 15% of our visas go through work visas, 15%. About 2/3 through family reunification. Now, is that what we want? I would argue that that's what Ted Kennedy worked on in the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. I think we have to decide what kind of culture we want to create around that and be honest with our own history about it. One thing I have to say too, by the way, about this. You know when we say that immigrants built America, or that America was founded by immigrants, we have defined American as actually we're trying to expand that to be more inclusive of Native American and Black Americans. I think it's insulting to Black people and Native Americans whenever we say that, because we leave those two fundamental groups of people out. So before we talk any policy, let's first have an uncomfortable and honest conversation about what the facts are and what the necessary context even is. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Sam Leitchinger. I'm a junior at the college. You mentioned getting questions about where you're quote-unquote from, and that's never a question that white people in this country face. You get the benefit of the doubt that you are from the United States. So once we have an issue with acknowledging other cultures, but on the other hand, we also have a racial issue even with people who were born in this country that aren't white. So maybe this is a very cynical question, but how do we go about trying to change the ignorance in the way we look at immigrants when we can't even look at each other without trust?
Whoa. I don't think it's a cynical question, although I subscribe to the James Baldwin quote about, pessimism and cynicism are of no use to me, right? It means that life is an academic matter. My life is too real to be cynical or pessimistic. It's the first thing. Second thing, this is why at Define American we've been very explicit about marrying race to immigration, right? I don't know, in this country, the first citizenship law we ever had was in the 1790, that only free white men could be US citizens. In this country, the first ever law we passed to exclude a group of people was the Chinese Exclusion Act. In this country, Native Americans couldn't become American citizens until 1924. We did not give Native American citizenship until 1924. I was in an event, I told about this in a class today, I was in an event, again in North Carolina, a year ago now, and this black woman, elderly black woman, comes up to me and says, Mr. Vargas, I find it really interesting that you say that your life is defined by pieces of papers you don't have. And then she pulled out this really old piece of paper, and she said, My great-great-great-grandmother came to America, landed in South Carolina, and was given this piece of document, which is a bill of sale, saying that she's a slave. So can you connect the papers that she got to the papers that you and your people can't seem to get? So to me, the parallels, the differences, but the parallels, right? And the fact that we can't really confront immigration issues until we confront the original sin of this country, those two things have to come hand in hand. That's why for me, one of the most exciting things happening right now in activism is how the Black Lives Matter movement is working with immigrant rights activists, particularly young immigrant rights activists. You see a lot of solidarity. Now the question here is white people. I love white people. You're wonderful, you race me, right? Whew. But it's really exhausting as a person of color to always have to explain to white people what's up, right? So what role do white people have to play to talk to each other about these issues? Because what I find in all of my travels is the white progressives only talk to the white progressives and don't talk to the white conservatives because they don't think that they're, alike at all. We all need you to talk to each other. I would argue that come November 9th, the era for talking in silos, the era for talking in acronyms that only people who agree with you know, the era in which we only talk to people who agree with us, who believe our own mindset, that's over. It has to be. If our democracy is really going to survive, it's going to depend on us having these more uncomfortable conversations and insisting on the connections of these issues. And that has to start with young people and young white people like you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Will Parsons. I'm a sophomore here at the college. And my question is, in your view, how do you quantify the similarities or the differences between what we've been talking about tonight in terms of illegal immigration and the refugee crisis coming from the Middle East?
I'm working on an essay right now that I'm really nervous about. It's about immigration and asylum and refugees in the Obama era. Given the decision of the administration to allow, 10,000 Syrian refugees out of the 5 million refugees that have left Syria so far. I just find it interesting too that, the first minority president, the first black president, is responsible for deporting more people of color in the history of this country. I think that is something that President Obama is going to have to justify and really talk about why he had to do that and he felt the need to do that. And for me, it's an uncomfortable thing because I'm one of the people that he did not deport. So why not, right? But to your point, I think this is where words really matter. And if you read The Guardian or The Economist, right, how they use migrant, how they use asylee, how they use refugee, the terminology that is getting used is much more nuanced and complex than how we in America do it, right? Like again, that's why for me, the moment with the Central American children was such a key moment, because when you looked at how the mainstream media covered it, they did not look at the Central American children as refugees. They were illegal immigrants storming at the border. No one really, for the most part, dared question the root of what happened in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and what role did the United States play in the conditions in those three countries. I'm sorry, who started the drug war? What's that? Thank you. Right? So this is where words really matter, and words create the space so we can ask harder questions and allow for complexity. But the key point to me, the bigger point is this: 244 million migrants, that includes refugees, by the way, all around this world, right? I've been investigating this, and apparently there's really no human declaration of migrant rights in the UN Charter, and I'm curious about that. And I find it really interesting that most of us are migrating to countries that previously colonized and imperialized us. A friend of mine said it's the jig is up argument, right? If you came to us, we're gonna come to you. Well, that's more of a tweet than an actual explanation. So we really want to understand how we talk about migration and how do we talk about it in a way that really owns up to our own history and why it's happening the way that it is and what do we do now. I think it's unconscionable, frankly, that we're allowing 10,000 Syrians in this country. And people who say to me that we're overpopulated, clearly you haven't been to South Dakota and North Dakota and Montana and Wyoming. I have. I bet you we can welcome refugees and immigrants there and they would create jobs because, immigrants are actually more likely to create jobs than native-born citizens. Thanks.
Is there one over there?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Filadera. I'm a journalism master's candidate at the Harvard Extension School. You talked a lot about the lack of humanizing stories in the media. I'm wondering, as minorities who are really isolated with gaining information resources, like how can we amplify our voice to correct all of the false facts that are in the media? I think of something as simple as, the growth in the Latino population being from third generation Americans, and really just like the narrative just completely missing the point. So how can we amplify those voices and hold the media accountable when it's actually a tool for free speech?
So I should just say this, by the way, and I'm sad to say this, there are less people of color in newsrooms now than when I started in journalism in 1998. I would argue that if there were more Latinos and Latinas in positions of power in American newsrooms beyond Telemundo and Univision, the way immigration is covered would be totally different. First of all, it wouldn't be only a Latino issue, right? And I have this, I don't know what to call it, people always assuming that I'm Latino because of my name. FYI, when you see an Asian-looking person with a Latino name, it means they're Filipino. And it's called Spanish colonialism, just FYI. So there's that. I actually think social media has been a real corrective to this, right? When especially young Latinos and Latinas, the Latinx community, finding social media to correct that narrative, but it has to be a more concerted, systematic effort, right? I mean, this is something that Nico and I talk a lot about, which is that how do we really improve? I almost feel like the word diversity is losing its kind of weight. I feel like it must really become a question of inclusion and representation. So when you're in a newsroom and you're talking about people as if they're like other people because there's no one in the room who's that person, there's actually something wrong, right? So I think that's something that needs to change, right? But that's something journalistically that structurally we really need to figure out. I remember when I was a reporter at the Chronicle in San Francisco. San Francisco was one of the first minority-majority cities in the country. In the newsroom, in the city desk that I was a part of, there were 7 of us who were people of color out of 80 reporters. I mean, I was like, what? Right? So that has to change. Yes?
Hi, my name is Vlada. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School, and I'm Eastern European immigrant. So I guess you can call Eastern Europeans people of color of Europe, because we are kind of the target audience of those go-home vans in the streets of London. I used to live in Great Britain. So my question is about economics, really. So
I'm sorry, the question is about what?
About economics, global economics. So research from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, showed that if we open border to labor, it would add at least $1 trillion to a global GDP, as opposed to just mere $50 billion if we remove all remaining barriers to trade and capital flows. So should we redefine this whole narrative as a global development narrative, since people seem to be responding to it so much better than just to calls of humanizing people and seeing people as human beings?
Democrats and progressives in DC are going to hate what I'm about to say, which is that I think it is time that we have that conversation. There's been almost, a decade now in which the term open borders is like, no, Jose, you can't say that. Like, we're gonna lose the argument. Well, what about our humanity? What about common sense, right? Is there anything more natural than people moving?
No, I don't think so.
Is there anything more natural than people moving, right? And look, I totally believe, especially in the era that we're living in, that a country must define and defend and protect its borders. I totally get that. But I'm sorry, are ISIS people coming from Mexico? I mean, according to Donald Trump, they are, but, right? So for me, we have ceded that ground. We don't want to have that argument because people say that, hey, Republicans are never going to go for that. Now, mind you, I have had enough conversations with conservatives, Tea Party members, and Republicans across this country, and not only Republicans in Texas, but Republicans in Alabama, that I think we sell ourselves short by insisting on just having one paragraph, one sentence conversations, right? Like, when you actually dig deeper into this, Americans actually get it. They understand that because the stuff that they buy at Walmart is cheap, that comes at a price for something else, right? I think it's us. When us, I mean the elite us, who think that the American public isn't ready for this kind of tough and real talk. I think they are. And I think after this election, that's what we should have. That's why, for example, I said that thing that somebody tweeted it a couple of days ago when I said it for the first time, and I'm already getting emails from people talking about, why are you talking about iPhones having more migrant rights than you do? Because it does, right? And I think that is a relevant, valid conversation. And I think we're ready for it.
Yeah, I think it's just about time to link, if we want to eradicate poverty and achieve development goals, the Millennium Development Goals, it's time to basically be honest about the fact that we cannot eradicate poverty just by doing charitable interventions or social justice.
And let me just say this as a fact. So I'm now an undocumented entrepreneur. So this is where it gets really interesting. You can't hire an undocumented person knowingly, although we all know that you guys kind of do, right? You can't hire them knowingly, but they can hire you. So it's legal for me to have a business and hire people. So between Define America and Emerging Us, I employ 20 people. I'm a pretty good employer, so we provide really good benefits in health insurance. The very same health insurance that I can't get myself because I'm undocumented. So I have to buy a special private insurance to have insurance for myself. Now, undocumented entrepreneurs, I've met a lot of us across this country, and we're not at all a part of the conversation. Did somebody just say something? Oh, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. A lot of what you said sort of resonated with the current discourse in India around caste. What we hear, that the conversation is about race and ethnicity, and in India it's about caste. But my question really is about, the whole dialogue or the discourse around immigration, or, whether you call people undocumented aliens or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like a turf war, right? So we don't have the resources.
I'm sorry, it's a what?
It's like a turf war. It's like saying we don't have the resources to provide for so many additional people.
Yes.
But a lot of the things you've said actually point to the exact opposite.
Yes.
So in a way, we have to turn the discourse around to a contributory discourse rather than one that talks about resource constraints. So how does one do that? And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm a Fulbright faculty fellow from India visiting MIT.
By the way, I cannot wait to see India. I think when I finally get a passport, I go to the Philippines first to see my mom, then Canada, Anne of Green Gables. That was a big one for me when I was a kid. And the country that gave birth to Sushmita Sen, India.
Okay.
So I want to go see India. This is actually the big challenge that we have at Define American, which is turning that narrative, right? The fact, I pointed this a few minutes ago, the fact that we in the media, for the most part, there are exceptions, for the most part had accepted the narrative. Did you hear a single question during the debate about immigration that isn't about immigrants as a threat to America? And the free association from immigrants and national security, right? I mean, in this country, before 9/11, we had the Immigration and Naturalization Services. Then it was gutted, and it became Department of Homeland Security. And somewhere up there, George Orwell is still smiling. In this country, we were terrorized in 9/11, and then we started terrorizing each other. And in many ways, immigrants, Muslims, right, have become in many ways the biggest target of that domestic terrorism. And it's going to take not just policy. Now, look, we passed what? The 1964 Civil Rights Act in 1964, and the Black Lives Matter conversation is as essential as ever. Just because we pass immigration reform, does that necessarily guarantee that immigrants in this country are going to be welcomed and integrated in American life? We're only talking about undocumented people, by the way. We're not even talking about people who are legal permanent residents who never who never get to the point of wanting to be US citizens because they feel like they're not even a part of this country. I think this is a really tough conversation in the Asian American community, right? Like, what does civic participation look like? So this is a big tough, and anything we can do to help work together. I'm Jose at defineamerican.com, by the way. Any ideas that you have, Jose at defineamerican.com. Please let me know.
Jose, I have a final question.
Yes, sir.
Here you are in a room full of Harvard students, arguably among the most elite students on the planet, all of whom will go on in the coming decades to be leaders of one kind or another. And in your own life, you've had to really inhabit some personal courage to make some decisions in your professional career and in the way you talk about and address these issues. Even just to go on Fox News in this election cycle, I think is an act of personal courage, given the threats I see people make against you online. And I wonder, what are some of the wells you draw from to fill your reservoir of courage to make these moral choices that leadership requires?
Ugh. Well, first of all, I am here because of him, so thank you for inviting me here. He's been a dear, dear friend. First thing. Second thing, actually, this is my phone. You know, I live on airports, and I have a playlist called Inspiration. And you know what it is? It's me downloading actual YouTube videos and the podcast of it, of speeches from people like Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and James Baldwin. Those are the three people who appear here the most. I was an African American studies major in college. These three people gave me a language to claim myself. They gave me a way to think about of an America that I had to pledge allegiance to that didn't pledge back. They gave me a space to actually ask harder questions than sometimes we are asked of. So that to me is wells and wells of inspiration and peace. I find a lot of peace in history. I find a lot of peace that in the history of this country, what's legal didn't always mean what was just. I mean, if we think about right now, we're 15 days from maybe electing the first female president in this country at a time when in this country it was actually illegal for women to read and to go to school, right? The fight that all these people in this country, I would argue that the very definition of America are the people who have had to fight for it because they were excluded from it. I think that's the beauty of America. And there's this quote that I think a lot about. It's a quote that actually Baldwin gave to Toni Morrison. And it's a quote that I hope every young person here thinks about. I think a lot about it because of my mom and because of what was paid. And the quote goes something like this. Your crown has been bought and paid for. Your ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, they already gave it up for you. It's already done. Now you can love yourself. It's possible. So please take that with you. Thank you again for having me. Thanks, man. Ooh.
Thank you.